Okay, welcome to session 14, part A. I'm going to talk about chapter 10. Turns out session 14 and 15, I want to talk about chapter 10. There's a lot of material. There are a lot of important concepts in chapter 10. Actually, I almost think the authors maybe should have devoted more space to it. There's maybe some stuff they left out. So there's probably a lot of supplemental stuff that I'm going to put in my lectures. These may be especially important because I'm going to cover some stuff that are not, some stuff that is not in the textbook. Okay, the first thing I'm going to talk about what is an externality. And I have taught this before, and it turns out there's so many students when they hear the word externality, they think it's just synonymous with a bad thing. And I've heard a certain politician who's kind of a rising star, young politician with a economics degree make this same mistake. I've heard her talk about externalities and treat them as if it's just a synonym for something bad. And that is not the case. Externalities, okay, does not mean it's not the same thing as just something bad. Okay, I want you to learn that. That's the key thing. And the simplest definition, so the book's probably has one definition. My definition, I think, is similar to the book's, is it is an activity that affects people who are external to the transaction. People who are not involved in the transaction, they get either benefits or costs from that transaction. So, for instance, say there's an auto plant, makes cars, but it releases pollution. So it could be that the people who live by that plant, they're not even buying cars. So they're external to any transaction from the auto plant, but the pollution may affect the neighbors of the auto plant. So there's an activity that would have costs to those neighbors, the pollution. Um, so there's also positive externalities, and I think the main one they give is that if I paint my house, the book says if you paint an ugly color, but let's say I paint my house a beautiful color, repaint it, and maybe I pay a painter to do it, okay? So the transaction is between me and the painter. But there are other people who may benefit or may suffer costs from this, my neighbors. Um, if I repaint my house and it looks good, my neighbors benefit from that. So we'd call that a positive externality. Okay, some examples of negative externalities. Okay, the big one is pollution. Okay, another one is traffic. So if I just drive on the road, I clutter up the roads more than they would be without me. So I'm causing extra clutter, extra traffic for other drivers. So what I do is causing an external. There's actually no transaction, but there are people outside the transaction, the other drivers, who suffer costs from my driving. And this isn't. I'm not talking about pollution. Suppose I drive some electric vehicle that doesn't emit any pollution, but I still clutter the road. So traffic is a negative externality. Let's see. I paint my house an ugly color. So as I give this lecture, it's now early October 2020. Say if I go to a public gathering, if I go to a bar and don't wear a mask, even if I do wear a mask, there's still a chance that I could release COVID virus to people. And so in that case, it is a negative externality. Then another case, I play music real loud, my neighbors suffer. I buy a motorcycle that has noise pollution, that's another case of a negative externality. Positive externality, I said I paint my house a beautiful color. My neighbor barbecues food that smells good and I like it, that would be a positive externality. If I get a flu shot, okay, so this is not only a good thing for me, but if there's less chance I get the flu, there's less chance that other people will catch the flu from me. So those other people who are not involved, so when I go to the pharmacy, I may pay the pharmacist for my flu shot. There are people outside that transaction who benefit from it. So when I get a flu shot, that's a positive externality. If I wear a mask, that's a positive externality. Um, and again, October 2020, hopefully just around the corner, there's a COVID vaccine. If I get the COVID vaccine, that gives benefits to other people. Other people will be less likely to catch COVID if I get the vaccine. That would be a positive externality. Okay, and just to bring this home, that externality is not the same thing, is not a synonym for bad thing. Let me give a kind of 2 by 2 table. So I'm going to give a few cases, or maybe one example for each case, not an externality, an externality. Okay. And then there's, so an activity could be an externality or not be an externality. It could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. Okay, and so let's put in a box, 2 by 2 table. So I'm going to fill in this box, give an example for each of the 4 possibilities. So first, a good thing that is not an externality is just kind of a normal economic transaction. So I own a manufacturing company. I manufacture a baseball. I sell it to someone. Okay, that person benefits from buying the baseball. I benefit from the money. We each benefit, and assuming that baseball does not impose um, uh, benefits or costs to other people, we would not say there's any externalities involved. But it's a transaction, and both of us benefit. Uh, the manufacturer is selling it to someone who values the baseball more than the manufacturer, so there's some gains from exchange. Okay, so we call that a good thing. Okay, a good thing that is an externality. So I paint my. Let's say I mow my lawn. Okay, suppose I hire a gardener. I pay the gardener, but there's other people who may benefit from that. My neighbors may benefit from seeing my beautiful lawn. Okay, if that were the case, it's a good thing and it's an externality. We'd call it a positive externality. Okay, and then something that's a bad thing that's an externality, pollution. That's the standard example of a negative externality. There's some things we might call a bad thing that are not an externality. Okay, and this is the key. There's a lot of people who think externality is synonymous with bad things. Okay, that's not true because there's some positive externalities. So not only that, there's some bad things that are not externalities, and I would call any workplace safety hazard. It's a bad thing, but it's not an externality. For instance, so my office um, is in Carroll Hall on George Mason campus. A lot of people don't realize it's by the physical plant, and my office is very near this big diesel tank. This is a huge diesel tank. It's about the size of a swimming pool. If someone blew that up, if there's some big explosion, I'm pretty sure I'm dead. Okay, my office is one of the closest offices to that that diesel tank. That's a safety hazard to me. Okay, now the reason it's not an externality is because the owner of that diesel tank is George Mason University. I'm the one who may suffer the cost from it, but I'm an employee of George Mason University. So we have a transaction going on, me and George Mason University. George Mason gives me a salary, so that's a bad thing. So, but if I see that, I would just say, look, to work at George Mason, I see that there's a safety hazard. You just need to pay me a little more, okay? And I estimate, that safety hazard, I don't feel it's that dangerous, but there's something involved. I would pay something like $200 to make it go away, to make that diesel tank be someplace else. So I would say, George Mason, this is worth about $200 in cost to me. You need to compensate me for my salary. So as a case, if I got another job offer that was everything else the same, I would say that job offer, if they made the salary $200 per year less, I'd be possibly willing to take that job. Okay, so George Mason has to, what we sometimes say, internalize that safety hazard. So they've imposed costs on me, the employee, but to keep the employee, they're going to have to pay me a little more. Okay, but that's a bad thing. We do not call it an externality because I'm the one suffering the costs, but I'm internal to the transaction. I'm part of the transaction that happens between me and George Mason University. So we would not call it an externality, even though we might call it a bad thing. Okay, so that is the introduction to externalities. So what? I'm going to end there, so I'm going to make this part A pretty short, a little over 11 minutes. Okay, see you in part B.